So yeah, I'm here to talk about managing electrical safety risks in multiple dwelling buildings. So as Jordan said, I'm Martyn Allen, Technical Director at the consumer campaigning charity Electrical Safety First. And just to give a bit of background to who we are and get technology to work, quite a busy slide there, and I apologise for that. And I'll be talking around that and coming into some of the pertinent points in more detail. But in terms of who we are, why we exist, what we do, and how we go about it, that sort of slide summarises what we do. And at the very top, everything we get involved with is indeed data-driven. And so the reason for our interest and purpose in life is the fact that electricity does cause about 50% of all fires in the home. There's a number of electrical shock injuries that, of course, as well, but we struggle to get the data in that, and it's something we continue to press for. But certainly when you look at the figures in terms of electrical-related fires, that's quite a large number. And whilst fires overall have come down, the electrical-related ones have stayed about the same. So clearly more work to be done. And when you look at a fire in a multiple dwelling building, then the consequences are quite more serious. But looking at the diagram in particular, so the way we go about what we do is looking at a number of sort of key drivers, and we look at the environmental side, the installation risks, product risks, and also consumer behaviour, which is an important factor, particularly because most of the fires that I referred to just now are actually down to misuse of those appliances or indeed the installations. But we went to the top in terms of environmental. I know much of the morning was talked about net zero, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. There's also the rollout of EV charging and the migration towards emissionless vehicles within quite a few short years, actually. We've got legislation upon us. We've got gaps and equality in that space, and I'll be talking about that. And we find ourselves in the middle of an energy crisis, and that's leading to changes in behaviour and also scarcity of products, to name but two. Installation-wise, we've got a big issue around the competence of people doing work or carrying out maintenance. We've got standards that need to sort of surround that kind of thing. We've got an increasing challenge around not having enough people. The conversation in net zero, particular poignant in that space, because we just simply don't have enough skilled people to do the installations of that net zero technology. We don't have enough resource to carry out sort of inspection and testing in traditional properties as well. That is an increasing challenge that we need to address, and whether that's through growth and or upskilling, but it will require a collaborative effort to that. The consequences of not having enough skilled people lead to more unregulated work, and that comes with lots of challenges and unsafe installations that can lead to injury and indeed fire. And also we allow enforcement to pick up where legislation is in place, and sadly pressures on resources often mean that the enforcement that we'd like to see isn't there, and more needs to be done to put that in place. In terms of product safety, and I'll go into more detail later, we've got the ongoing sort of place where we all buy products from online marketplaces, and many things that we find for sale on online marketplaces are not as great as you would normally find in the high street. Many substandard, often unsafe products for certain, and more needs to be done in that space, certainly to tighten up legislation. Product registration and product recalls. Many of us don't register our products with the manufacturer, and then if there is a problem, then they really do struggle to contact people so that they can take action and recall that product. We've got repairability rules coming in now, and that presents challenges when people trying to repair their own products or people who are not skilled to repair them. And also in the connected space, interoperability of technology, again, linking back to the net zero space, and products not really operating the way they potentially should or intended to do so. And last but not least, on the behavioural side, there is a degree of use and misuse. There's certainly an element of DIY, and we've run campaigns saying don't DIY because it's not always a great outcome. And just people not being aware of the risks to do with electricity in many cases. So with all that in place, then, how we go about what we do is we do it in a two-pronged approach. So we do direct activity, that's running targeted awareness campaigns. We also provide lots of advice to consumers, such as encourage where they can find a professional to get some electrical installation work carried out, or how to make sure you reduce your risk when you're buying products, for example. And then the indirect approach is all about lobbying for changes in legislation, so that's working with government departments, lobbying for changes to standards, again, using evidence that we found through our own investigations to get changes to standards, and developing best practice, all with the consumer at the very centre of all of that. And to achieve that, we do work with government departments, with industry and other safety organisations. So that's pretty much sums us up as an organisation. But when we drift into sort of buildings per se, for new buildings, it's relatively straightforward in terms of mitigating risk. You need good design. You obviously need quality products, and then you need people who are installing those products to install them in a safe and compliant way. We need protective systems, whether that's monitoring, things like fire, heat, smoke, even damp and water. Monitoring devices, and then those monitoring devices can lead into interventions to remove the risk and make things safe. We clearly need lots of competent people to do the installations, do the design, and even specify the products. And around all of that, we need accountability. And to bring all that together, then we clearly need some legislation. And it's a bit of a fragmented space in terms of legislation surrounding buildings, certainly on the electrical side. We've got the building safety bill that I've italicised there. That's working its way through Parliament now. We hope that that's going to address many of these things. It was really born from the fallout of the Grenfell Tower tragedy and the inquiry that's still ongoing. We hope that the legislation in that space will sort of tighten up new buildings. However, we clearly have lots of existing buildings out there. And the way you're going to mitigate risk in those existing buildings is about regular inspection, regular maintenance. And when you turn to legislation to make that happen, that really is a 10-year lottery, and it shouldn't be. What about communal areas? Where's the legislation for that? What about other services, not just fixed installation? What about the services? What about generation equipment? Storage equipment? The list goes on. But the legislation surrounding all those things is fairly weak. We clearly need also competent people to assess those risks from the inspection and testing, and we need accountability and enforcement to support that as well. But last but not least, because you can only do so much with legislation, and the legislation that I'll touch on the next slide still leaves a residual amount of risk, which is all around what consumers need to do. So consumer education, making them aware of electrical risks, is going to be fundamental for quite some time. When you look at the legislative landscape that actually is in place, there's a map of the UK, and it makes life harder for us, certainly, because we operate UK-wide. There is no centralised solution, so each of the devolved nations does their own thing. I'll start with Scotland at the top, that they have in place and have for quite some time now. They've got mandatory 5-yearly electrical safety checks. That's periodic inspection and testing, to those who know what I'm talking about, both in the private rented sector and in the social rented sector. When you go to Northern Ireland, they committed to introducing 5-yearly checks in the private rented sector, but because of political challenges that are still ongoing over there, what they thought they would introduce in May of this year sadly hasn't happened, and that's still ongoing, work in progress. Wales were about to introduce mandatory 5-year checks in both the private rented sector and social rented sector from the 15th of July of this year, but they've now put that back to the 1st of December of this year because of COVID-related issues and just other ongoing challenges. So that's moved back. Disappointing, but it's still going to happen. And last but not least, in England, then we've got electrical safety checks in the private rented sector that came over the line for all tenancies in 2021, so last year. And the government have just announced a consultation on the social rented sector running from June to August of this year. So, we'll be certainly inputting into that and hopefully at least to mirror requirements that are in the PRS. So we've almost got the UK covered with the exception of Northern Ireland. I will touch on net zero, but very quickly, because I know you've had some detailed conversations about that earlier. But, we are in a period of change. We've got more the way we heat buildings, so electrification of heat is going to be a big thing. EV charging, battery storage, generation. We've got prosumers, so that's both generating, storing, and using electrical energy. We've got the smart home and smart technology that can sort of help to sort of ease pressure on the grid as well, that I'm sure was touched on before, as can demand side response. But I've highlighted at the bottom that what we don't seem to have a grip on at the moment is the preparedness of the existing housing stock in terms of its ability to cope with the extra load that's going to be connected to it. So the biggest loads would be the likes of heat pumps and EV charging. They can only do so much in terms of offset with energy generation and energy storage. You can do a little bit more with switching using smart technology and moving things around with encouraging time of use initiatives. But ultimately, what is left residual-wise in terms of investment in the infrastructure of the grid is around understanding what the current housing stock is and how it can cope with those loads being bolted to it. And there's still some work to do in that space. And then when we know what that picture looks like, we can assess the impact and make the necessary investment. Similar to before, there's a need for lots of competence in that space. The likes of heat pumps, for example, requires both the heating and plumbing side as well as the electrical person who's going to connect the thing up and specify the size and cable side of things. And that's across all the technologies in that net zero space. And we also, there's a huge skills gap that we're all facing that I need lots of collaboration to address that. And we also need lots of accountability and enforcement as well to uphold all of that activity. Racing along and moving into product safety, I touched on that briefly, but online marketplaces, we all shop online, and that was accelerated through the pandemic, which is almost the only place you could buy online. But the fact remains that many of the products that are sold on online marketplaces from third-party sellers who are often not located in the UK are not safe and compliant. We do loads of investigations, and the result is often the same. So we believe that there's more legislation required to tighten up regulation of online marketplaces. Not being anti-online, that's clearly the way to go, but we expect to have the same experience shopping online as you would expect from shopping on the high street. Tied to that is around product scarcity, with both the war in Ukraine, COVID pressures, that the amount of components that are about are not what they used to be. So supply lines, supply chains are very different, and people are looking for alternative components to put in their products. So product scarcity is something to be aware of, and we make sure that we'll try to make sure that the end product is as safe and compliant as it was several years ago. So product scarcity is definitely something that we've got our eye on. Product registration, I mentioned before, and product recalls continues to be a thing. If I was in the physical room with yourselves, I would ask you if you'd always register your products. And the answer often is that people don't either understand it, they don't see the purpose, the need, they'll do it tomorrow, or they often just don't want to be bombarded with market information. But registration is really essential in terms of a manufacturer has a product that they can contact you, make you aware of the issue, and tell you what you need to do to get the thing either repaired, replaced, and as well as any other compensation. Second-hand goods is again linked to the energy crisis. We're likely to see more second-hand goods coming into the market. That presents additional challenges because if they're not new, you don't know the provenance of those items. So it's something that we are certainly making consumers aware of, and making sure that they at least check that the product hasn't been recalled before they purchase it. And I've thrown in portable appliance testing because of the ongoing mitigation of electrical risk to do with certainly items that are provided as part of a tenancy. So something that landlords should be encouraging, because the legislation in England is only for the fixed installation. It doesn't cover portable appliances, but that still doesn't mean that you shouldn't do portable appliance testing on the items that you provide as part of the tenancy. You can see a couple of images that I've got there. We produce a plug pin gauge there. We've renamed it as a plug checker. That's a quick and easy credit card sized tool that you can plug in an item as the slots you can see there. And that'll easily tell you whether the plug and the plug pins are of the correct space. So if it's really difficult to insert the plug, then it will suggest that it's not safe and compliant. Also, if you can see any any red when you plug in, then that means it's undersized and certainly substandard. And similarly, if you align the pins on the plug to either the earth or the live pins to the left-hand side of that gauge, then you can see that very quickly whether this thing is safe or compliant. So a quick and easy way of checking compliance of UK plugs. Trading standards use them extensively, and we know it's been of value to people carrying out portable appliance testing and other people, consumers, landlords, to name but two. The other slide is the other image that you can't really see, but we run a product recall database. So you can go onto that section on our website, electricalsafetyfirst.org.uk, look at the recalls page, quick put in just the make of your item of concern or what you want to check, and you'll very quickly see on the list whether the item has indeed been recalled. Last but not least, before I'm keen to get some views and any questions, but I did mention at the start we do everything in collaboration. Consistency is key to all of this. We run a number of groups. We've got a Wiring Regulations Advisory Group, WAG for short. That's a way of bringing multi-stakeholders together to provide answers to common questions to do with the wiring regulations, British Standard 7671, to provide that consistency where any requirements in the wiring regulations are not as clear as they ought to be. So we provide that consistent view. Similarly, we produce a number of best practice guides. The one you can see on the screen is number 4. That gives examples of classification codes. So anybody who's carrying out a routine electrical safety check or periodic inspection and test, then if you find something that isn't up to the current requirements in the British Standard, then you need to give it a code. And we provided a list of example codes, again, developed with multi-stakeholders. So we're providing that consistent approach. We've got a number of guides aimed at landlords, just to remind them what their legal obligations are and how they can find a professional to help them do the inspections and what they should do when they get sight of the inspection report. And last but not least, there's loads of consumer guidance on our website. The two images you can see there, one is an overload calculator where it's a bit like a conveyor belt where you can drag and drop items into that 4-way extension lead and quickly see what the current is, because consumers don't often know what current is, or amps and watts and volts. So when you get over 13 amps, it will tell you that you've gone into an overload situation. Just trying to give some obvious imagery to educate consumers on what overloading actually is, because we see loads of problems which often lead to a fire. That is a quick and dirty run through a few slides, because I was keen on time and wanted to stick to time. I wanted to take some questions. I mean, Jordan, I'm not sure if you've got any questions, or I'll stop sharing my screen now.
So my main question for you, while we wait for audience questions, would be, what do you think of the do you think it is necessary to have protection of title in this industry to ensure that those carrying out electrical works are qualified?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, competence is a key word, and we would always encourage consumers to use a registered electrician for all installation work. So that's somebody who's registered with a recognised certification body. There are only really 2 operating now. One is traded under the brand NIC, EIC, and the other is NAPEP, really. And in Scotland, you've got Select, and for broader installations, you've got the Electrical Contractors Association. But we always, so that gives assurance that the work is done to the national standard, British Standard 7671. And also, if in the unlikely event something isn't correct, people are unhappy or they think something's unsafe, then there's a redress mechanism. You can go back to that certification body and they'll investigate on a consumer's behalf. And both NIC, IC, and NAPEP have insurance warranty systems. So those means of redress is your best way. And the same with the periodic inspection and testing. There's an extra layer of skill required to do an inspection of an existing. But again, there's a way that you can go into the website for registered competent person electrical and check whether it's for installation or a safety check, and make sure you've got the right person to do the job.
What new regulations do you think need to be brought in to improve electrical safety even further?
Well, for new builds, it's reliance on the British Standard 7671, and that goes through periods of change every 3 years. It's pretty much a general rule for new requirements coming in from Europe and internationally, or to pick up anything that's becoming an emerging risk. But I think looking at the legislation map that I showed a while back, we really need parity for across all the nations in the UK, so that we do. It's not unreasonable to expect wherever you live, certainly in a multiple dwelling unit, and again, come back to Grenfell, really, that was a multiple tenure building. You've got people who are leasehold occupiers. You've got social rented tenants and private rented tenants in there, but you've got the legislation different for each of those tenures, and that shouldn't be right. It should be the same protections irrespective of that. So I think whilst we've got the consultation for the social rented sector, I would encourage everybody to feed into that and support at least mirroring with the requirements that we have for the private rented sector.
Do you think that we also need something for those who are buying houses? Because at the moment, unless you do a survey, it's basically a wild guess as to whether or not your house that you've just bought is safe electrically. Do we need it to be as ubiquitous as like a EPC certificate?
Yeah, I think it's, when you get into the homeowner territory, and that's something we're certainly considering internally here, that it's not, I think it's something to push for. We're certainly having this thrashed around internally, that when you're committing to sort of buy, then you would expect to have an electrical installation condition report or site of the installation certificate before you commit to buy. I'm not saying that it needs to be such safe and compliant before you buy it, but you at least need to have the information so you're aware before you commit. It might even feed into negotiations. If somebody says, on the report that it's actually in a poor state of repair, could do with a new consumer unit or even needs rewiring, at least you're aware of it before you commit to buying it. You might even be able to have a conversation and get some money knocked off that, So I just think that is something that would be sensible legislation to push into that space.
Perfect. I think that's all my questions. And unless any of the audience suddenly have any questions, which it doesn't seem they have currently, that's all we need from you. Unless there's anything else you want to add.
No. Again, thanks for the opportunity. I know safety is, it's often a dull topic, but it's so important.
Yeah.
And I think, I was busy on another call, but I caught sort of the back end of the conversation on the net zero space. We see that many of the reports coming out of government, they rarely, if ever, mention safety. And safety should not be a back seat. It needs to be front and centre when we're talking about rolling out net zero. There's massive change ahead, and that will require, I mentioned about preparedness. That is definitely a biggie. But there's going to be some consumer education needed, the way they need to interact with some of that new technology. So that needs to be built into the government programs. There's clearly a huge skills gap when, you talk about how many heat pumps we need over the next few years. The numbers are eye-watering, and we just simply don't have the people in place at this moment in time. When you look at the traditional electrotechnical workforce at the moment, if you do an age profile, many of them are on the wrong side of 50. And I know we don't have a cut-off for people retiring nowadays, but we need new people into the industry. We need to go into the schools. We need to recognise the profession of electrotechnical people as being something to aspire to, because if we don't do that and get that grassroots sort of acknowledgement of it's a sustained profession, there's work there for many people, and it is a truly sort of a valued profession to go into, more recognised and valued elsewhere in Europe. But we need to work together to make sure that we do sort of go into the schools, get it as a core skill, make sure people are paid the right amount for that type of work, because otherwise we won't deliver these net zero targets at all, because we won't have anybody to install the equipment and technology, notwithstanding the finance pressures and anything else you care to mention, but purely where are the people coming from? At the moment, there just aren't the people to roll out those plans. So that's something we need to work together on collectively, because for us, It's the consequence. If we don't have the skilled people, then you get unregulated work, or worse still, DIY, and that that is something that we see on a daily basis. But this is just on a much bigger scale.
And we talk so much about the skills gap because at the end of the day, what we're looking at is moving more towards electrification. So it's not that, the work is going to be the same as it is now. There's actually going to be more work for people going forward, which means we need even more people than just replacing those that are retiring. So it will be an important thing
absolutely
to address.
Yeah, it is. And it's not like just the wires and the walls anymore. We talk about wireless technology, configuring equipment, smart home technology, the new technology you see. It's all about working on a tablet and on a computer, really, to commission those items. It's not just, swinging a hammer and chisel to cut out to get a cable in a wall. There may be a bit of that for some things, but it's a much more detailed and technical job than it was a number of years ago. So I think, we need to get into the young people to tell them how attractive it is. And it's a sustained profession, definitely, and one that needs to be recognised and valued for what it is.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Martyn. I do agree that it's a very important subject, even if, it may not be the most fascinating or interesting or not probably the wrong word. You know what I mean.
I know
probably not the most exciting.
And we started this off with a terrible tragedy, and as you say, that whilst there were many factors tied into
it's
that,
important.
Let's say half of all electrical related fire, half of all fires in the home are electrical related. So more needs to be done to reduce that.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. You too.